Have you ever looked at our rankings and thought, why is that guy so low? He was awesome last year. Or what the hell do the guys see in that player? If you have, then this show is for you. This show includes hidden stats, trends, and facts for every team. And they all feed into the way we project the players for those teams in 2025. We're revealing every single one and telling you why they matter for fantasy on an all-new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to talk about every single team in the NFL. 32 interesting facts, one per team, harvested directly from Jared's process for generating the player projections that you come to DraftSharks.com for every single year. Basically a look behind the curtain at the kinds of things that drive how we do our process, why we like or don't like a specific player, a situation, an offense on whole. Is that a fair way to lay this out, Jared?
Yeah, exactly. I've been doing projections for Draft Sharks for over 10 years now. And it took me until a few years ago to get smart enough to actually start jotting down all these tidbits I come across as I'm working on the projection. So I started doing that a few years ago. And then, at that point, I was like, well, yeah, let's just turn this into an article. And we've had it up on the site past 2 or 3 years now.
The thing I do is gather research in a spreadsheet and then lose it for the next year and then do it again. And then 2-3 years later, I'm like, why didn't I just collect this stuff every single year so that I could look at it across years at this point? But, we've got Alex to help gather stuff like that. And we're doing a better job of scooping this stuff like we're talking about here today and presenting it, not losing it. These are the kinds of stats, facts, trends that you'll find in every player profile on DraftSharks.com. 4 of us right now are chin deep in working on these profiles. They will hit the site in early June, but you can find some of them already up right now because new this year, we're going to put an overview article for every single team on DraftSharks.com. You can check the site now and find Jared's Houston Texans preview. You can find the Indianapolis Colts preview. We're going to hit those teams in this show as well, but we're going to go in alphabetical order just to make it easy to keep everything in order. And we're going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. Jared, what's the fact that we should know about these guys?
Yeah, we saw a big shift in play calling from the Cardinals, which I think flew under the radar and has continued to fly under the radar. So the shift came right during their Week 11 bye. So before their Week 11 bye, the Cardinals passed on just 50.5% of their offensive snaps. They had a negative 5.1 pass rate over expected. After their bye, huge spike to a 61.3% pass rate, plus 6.7% pass rate over expected. And it's funny, everyone besides Kyler Murray benefited from that shift. Kyler went from quarterback 10 pre-bye to quarterback 17 post-bye, but everyone else, James Conner, running back 20 to running back 12. Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver 34 up to wide receiver 23 post-bye. Trey McBride went from tight end 4 to tight end 1 post-bye. So I think trying to figure out which version of the Cardinals we're going to get in 2025 is going to be something we'll be keeping a close eye on this summer.
Yeah, it's important to note this shift for projecting the team on whole. I think it's worth noting that James Conner was banged up over the final 3 games, which is nearly half of that 7-game stretch after the bye. Left week 16 early with a knee injury, barely played week 17, missed week 18 entirely. That might have had nothing to do with the play calling shift. I don't know. I'm also not sure how much we can do with this draft wise because Kyler Murray is QB8 in best ball ADP right now. Marvin Harrison Jr. is wide receiver 14 already. And Trey McBride is tight end 2. He's in the second round of drafts. So the market loves all these players. So even if they keep passing at that rate, it's kind of already baked into their draft prices.
Yeah, Harrison might need him to keep passing that 60% plus to pay off his ADP.
I'm a little disappointed that the market is, as on board with him turning things around fantasy wise this year as it is, because I would have liked for him to be hey, you guys were too high on him last year. Now you're going to miss out. But I think everybody's kind of collectively looking at him that way. Atlanta Falcons up next. Bijan Robinson, an interesting stat for him here. What you got, Jared?
Yeah, Bijan, big spike in usage from the first half to the second half of last season. 14.5 carries per game on a 56% carry share over Atlanta's first 8 games. That spiked to 20.9 carries per game, 65% of the team's carries over his final 9 games. And Bijan, over those final 9 games, running back 2 in expected PPR points per game, running back 3 in actual PPR points per game. I think if he gets that type of workload again in 2025 over the course of the season, he's as good a bet as any running back to lead the position in fantasy points this year.
To me, the fact that things shifted that way over the second half of the first season under a new coaching staff says that we should expect at least something closer to that than what we got the first half of last year. Bijan Robinson is my number one running back in drafts this year, primarily because when you compare him to Saquon Barkley, he has a bit more safety because of the receiving role. Catches a lot more passes than Saquon Barkley did last year. A little bit more touchdown luck to Barkley's scoring and some yardage luck to Barkley's scoring last year. So obviously both high-end players, but I'm targeting Robinson first in round one.
Yeah, me too. The other thing that makes me lean towards Bijan is just on the aging curve. He's like at peak right now, where Barkley, I don't think he's going to hit a wall, but it's at the point where he might start to tail off based on his age and just all the work he handled last year.
And in round one, you really are splitting hairs between players. So it might seem minuscule, but it matters. Baltimore Ravens up next. Mark Andrews among 43 tight ends with 30 plus targets last year. Here are his ranks: 8th in yards per route, 4th in Pro Football Focus receiving grade, 2nd in ESPN receiver score. Jared, why do those matter to you?
Mark Andrews is still very good at football. There's concerns about the passing volume in Baltimore and target competition with Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely there, but Mark Andrews is tight end 8 in ADP right now. I think that's factoring those concerns in. I think he's fairly priced. He's someone I'm definitely taking at that price tag.
I agree, especially if I have Lamar Jackson on that team to begin with. Buffalo Bills up next, and a guy that's going to be a touch point throughout the offseason, I think, especially as more drafters come online. James Cook finished 11th among running backs in PPR points per game last year. Seems awesome, but what's the caveat?
27th among running backs in expected PPR points per game, which again, if you're not familiar, it's just taking all the usage the player gets, carries and targets for running backs, and where those came on the field, and coming up with what we'd expect that player to score if he was, an average football player on an average team. Now, obviously James Cook's a good player on a good offense. You'd expect him to outscore his expected production, but he was the 4th biggest overachiever at running back last year. I think you should expect some regression in 2025, unless you think his usage is going to improve.
And I don't. So I've been fading him big time in early drafts, especially when you look at the running backs going around him. I agree. He's kind of set up in a spot where he should overachieve versus expectation. But when the gap is that large, you have to expect some regression. I don't think there's enough regression built into the way he's being drafted right now. Carolina Panthers, if they regress, it would probably be in the other direction based on how the past 2 years have gone. Why might we want to believe in positive regression here?
Bryce Young was really good after returning to the starting lineup in week 8 after getting benched. From week 8 on, he was 6th among 35 qualifying quarterbacks in Pro Football Focus passing grade. Now, he was still only quarterback 17 in fantasy points from week 8 on, so he needs to kind of take another step for him to matter in fantasy. But with the addition of Terry McLaurin, and now, Young heading into year 3, I definitely think that's possible. And then just his improvement, I think, is good for folks counting on Terry McLaurin to be an asset this year. Chuba Hubbard doesn't hurt him either. So it's just good news that Young took that step forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure Bryce Young's going to matter for fantasy. He has a shot to be, worthwhile for super flex and 2 quarterback leagues, maybe a value pick there. But I think it's most important because pretty much all of the other offensive pieces in Carolina are modestly priced. Chuba Hubbard's a little on the expensive side, but the receivers especially are all modestly priced. So you can stash players beyond Terry McLaurin on your bench, see what happens if things continue to improve in Carolina. Things should improve in Chicago with a new coach and some new offensive pieces, but might not necessarily improve for DeAndre Swift. What do we not like about him?
Yeah, DeAndre Swift last year, dead last among 47 qualifying running backs in rush yards over expected per attempt. So basically, he was producing a lot less than you'd expect him to on the ground, based on the blocking and the defensive alignment. A reminder of why I was wary of Swift pre-draft. He was a post-draft winner with the Bears not adding anything until round 7, but I think we still got to keep that in the back of our mind that he just wasn't very good last year. It's a new coaching staff, and it's still possible that the Bears replace him at some point this year.
Yeah, and we see rush yards over expected waver quite a bit year to year for lots of players. So I think the best way to use that stat is when we have multiple players qualifying from the same team. Unfortunately, we didn't have any other Bears running back qualify for those rankings in that particular category. Roschon Johnson's usage as primarily a short yardage guy also makes it difficult to really compare the other results between him and Swift. So I think it's not necessarily a reason to point to another specific guy in the Chicago backfield, but it's a reason to say Swift wasn't that good. Even if we don't know what the other answer is, we need to at least be open to the possibility of other answers in that Chicago backfield. I think Swift's going at a fine price right now where he's not high risk, but I'm also now a bit more interested in Roschon Johnson than I was before the draft. Well, I wasn't taking him because in case they took somebody early.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Smith's okay because I think his passing game role is pretty safe the way the roster is constructed right now. The other thing with Swift too is, and check his profile when it hits the site in June. I'd have to look it up, and I'm pretty sure he's been a below yards expected runner for most of his career. He's always been better in the passing game than he has in the running game.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure he likes running in between the tackles. Cincinnati Bengals don't like running the ball at all, and why would they? Because they've got Joe Burrow, who led quarterbacks in a lot of things last year, such as what, Jared?
Burrow led all quarterbacks in passing touchdowns last year, but with 43. It's a big number. You kind of would expect it to come down a bit, and we probably do. But the point with Burrow is his usage in and around the end zone was awesome. That kind of led to those 43 passing touchdowns. Burrow led all quarterbacks last year in expected passing touchdowns, red zone pass attempts inside the 10-yard line, and passes into the end zone. So beyond the fact that he's really good and his receivers are really good, the Bengals play calling just set him up for all those touchdowns.
Usually you could look at a quarterback over 6% touchdown rate and say, well, that guy's going to fall back this coming year. I don't think you should do that with Joe Burrow. His 6.6% TD rate this past year was just 0.1 of a percentage point higher than his previous high. His 3 fully healthy seasons have all been at 5.8% or higher. You look at him and Baker Mayfield finished back-to-back in most fantasy point rankings. Baker Mayfield to me is a huge regression candidate. I don't think Joe Burrow is. We'll talk more about Baker Mayfield when we get to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I think Joe Burrow is easily the most attractive non-runner at quarterback, somebody who doesn't give us big rushing numbers. He's being drafted that way. He's like 2.5 rounds ahead of Patrick Mahomes in underdog ADP, but I think it's appropriate. He's not somebody that I want to miss out on.
Yeah, me either. I'll take Burrow when I have Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. I don't think he's like a screaming value at cost right now.
Cleveland Browns. Here's somebody who might be a screaming value at cost right now because David Njoku in 8 games where he actually had, like full level usage last year was pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. He saw 9.9 targets per game in those 8 games with I used a route rate north of 60% to sort of get rid of the games that he either flat out missed or left early or was limited. So 9.9 targets per game, 23.6% target share, elite marks for a tight end. Njoku, if you just look at those 8 games, 6th among tight ends in PPR points per game, 3rd among tight ends in expected PPR points per game. Pass catching core doesn't look a whole lot different heading into 2025 now. Amari Cooper's gone. They brought in Deontay Johnson. We'll see if he even makes the final roster. David Njoku's tight end 12 in ADP. Every time I'm in a draft and Travis Kelce looks nice here, Mark Andrews looks nice here, or I can get Njoku in 2 rounds. I often lean towards passing on those tight ends and targeting Njoku in round 10 or 11.
I'll go ahead and predict that David Njoku is going to be my highest owned tight end when we get to the end of best ball season because, like you said, tight end 12 in underdog ADP, that's fallen since before the NFL draft. I'm assuming that drafters are like, they took Harold Fannin Jr. To me, that's not a good reason to downgrade David Njoku. The Browns are paying him plenty of money. He does hit free agency after this season, so it could be some planning for the future. It could just be taking best player available. There's room in an offense for both of those guys to be involved, not necessarily fantasy-wise, but for the Browns' purposes, for both of those guys to be factors. But I'm certainly not saying, David Njoku's coming off the field because of this rookie from Bowling Green.
Yeah, Fannin's a bigger threat to whoever he thinks going to be playing the slot snaps in Cleveland. That was kind of his profile coming in. If you listen to the Browns coaches, they've already kind of talked about him not being a traditional tight end. He's more of a big slot receiver.
Yeah, and if you look at the wide receiver depth chart, you'd be like, that's because they don't really have a good slot receiver. By the way, tight end 12 puts Njoku behind Evan Ingram, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, among other guys. I'm absolutely taking him straight up ahead of all 3 of those players. Dallas Cowboys. Jared, I'm just going to subtitle this one. Dak Prescott is a better fantasy quarterback than you think he is.
Yeah, and he has been in the past, and he was at times last year because the Cowboys, in their 8 games with Dak last year, they were 1st in the NFL in pass rate at 66.7%. They were 3rd in neutral pass rate, so it was not just a game script thing. They were coming into these games wanting to pass the ball. Their offensive coordinator from last year, Brian Schottenheimer, is now the head coach. You look at what they've done this offseason, and they've made minor additions only to the backfield. The back they took in the draft is a smallish pass-catching back. So I think everything sets up for the Cowboys to, again, be one of the pass-heaviest offenses in the NFL, and I think that makes Dak Prescott a value in drafts. I think it makes Jake Ferguson a value in drafts, and then we'll see kind of who emerges behind CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver.
Yeah, they traded for George Pickens. They put together the Garbage Pail Kids to be their backfield for this coming season. This might be the best wide receiver duo that Dak Prescott will have had in his career to this point. Like, you could say CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper were better. It's arguable at the very least. Amari Cooper was further along than Pickens is right now, but it wasn't full CeeDee Lamb at that point. Either way, very good wide receiver duo, an OC who's been around with Dak Prescott, is now the head coach, like you mentioned, historically pass-friendly head coach, by the way. So Dak Prescott, QB 14, strong value. He has given us seasons where he's been in the top 8, top 6. So you don't even have to say he has the upside to get there. He's proved it. We know that he can. So just go ahead and take him where he's going. Denver Broncos, quarterback that I might not be willing to take where he's going, but Bo Nix did show improvement over the second half of his rookie year, right?
He did, yeah. So if you compare his first 7 games to his last 10, his completion rate jumped from 61.2% to 69.7%. Yards per attempt, 5.6 the first 7 games, 7.4 over the last 10. His PFF passing grade also climbed from 57.5 to 80.7. From a fantasy perspective, you look at those last 10 games, he was quarterback 8 in fantasy points, which I think is right about where he's being drafted, which I don't even mind that spot among quarterbacks. It's just that Nix is in this big tier where, like, you know, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, our projections on those guys aren't much different than Bo Nix, and those guys are available like, you know, 3, 4, 5 rounds later. So it's tough for me to take a lot of Bo Nix, but I'm not like off him. I do buy him as, you know, a good real life and fantasy quarterback in a good system with Sean Payton. His price is just, you know, he's going a bit too high for me in drafts right now.
Exactly. And you don't have to dislike a quarterback in this range to not draft him. You have to dislike the strategy of taking a quarterback here. He's QB 9 and underdog ADP right now. And to draft a quarterback in that range, you have to believe that he has upside to like the top 4. Like he could have a special season. That's not me with Bo Nix. I look down at QB 17, 18, 19, and I find guys that are plenty capable of finishing QB 9 or even a little bit higher this year. So I'm out on Bo Nix just because of that value play and, you know, some of the surrounding receivers, but mostly because of where he's going in drafts, despite that impressive rookie season. Now, you're free to disagree with me. Jump on YouTube and tell us in the comments if you're like, you're crazy, Bo Nix is going to be special, I'm drafting him this year, and you're going to miss out. I would love to hear it, and you will absolutely hear back from me. We'll see if Jared's ready to argue, but you might have to attack a different player to really get him going, especially Caleb Williams would be a good target, by the way. Detroit Lions up next, and I mean, I feel like this is the centerpiece of any Lions fantasy talk this offseason. Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, and how they fit together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we know how good Gibbs was over the final 4 games of last season without David Montgomery. He was 3rd among running backs in expected fantasy points over that span, 1st in actual fantasy points. But over the first 13 games this season with David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs was just 20th at the position in expected PPR points per game. He was 6th in actual PPR points per game. So he was another, you know, big overachiever, which he'll probably continue to be. But for him to pay off his ADP, the usage has to change. He is not going to pay off his ADP if the workload split between Gibbs and Montgomery stays the same this year as it was last.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to overachieve versus expectation for his career because he's a fast player in a run-friendly place and just a good player. He got drafted 12th overall for a reason, but at his role, he has to just be special every year, and just betting on special at the top of a draft is just going to bite you at least as often as it pays off. You add in that they need to replace the OC this year, and there's probably some team-wide touchdown regression coming. They scored more touchdowns last year than even the previous 2 years when they were a very good offense under the same offensive coordinator. You can check out our best ball values video and article. We talked about Jahmyr Gibbs in both of those to get more details on why we're not necessarily buying Jahmyr Gibbs at his ADP this year. And by the way, I mentioned the YouTube comments, but you know, if you're listening on Spotify, feel free to let us know there what you think. I don't know, wherever else, leave us a review on the Apple App Store, wherever you want to tell us what you think. We'll listen to it. Green Bay Packers. The pass rate changed from 2023 to last year, also during last season. Why don't you tell us what we're looking at here with the Packers?
Well, the Packers surprisingly were one of the run heaviest offenses in the NFL last year. They finished bottom 3 in the league in pass rate, neutral pass rate, and pass rate over expected. Like you said, Matt, way down from what we saw in 2023. They were 58% pass in 2023, down to 49% pass last year. And that was by design. If you look at the neutral pass rate over expected, those dipped by a lot too. So big question in Green Bay this year, projecting all these guys, is are they going to remain as run heavy as they were last year? Are they going to shift all the way back to where they were in 2023? Is there going to be somewhere in between?
And there are a lot of what ifs to kind of work in there. I mean, Josh Jacobs, his first year with the team, did they overwork him? Do they scale that back some this year? How much of it was tied to Jordan Love's injuries, or was none of it tied to Jordan Love's injuries? He hurt an ankle in week 1. He hurt a groin in week 8. And if you look at the in-season numbers, They were passing below expectation all season, but through week 7, the Packers were 23rd in pass rate versus expectation at minus 2.8%. From week 9 on, following that groin injury for Jordan Love, they dropped to 29th in the league, third lowest at minus 5.5%. So there was some drop off even in that already low pass rate following that second Jordan Love injury that he did play through. They, of course, then drafted Matthew Golden in round 1. The Packers don't typically spend round 1 picks on wide receivers. So, there are lots of if then, maybe, we'll see. I think that's the key, is looking at this Packers offense for 2025 and not thinking that you have anything necessarily figured out.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're projecting their pass rate somewhere kind of right in between where they were in 2023 and 2024. And then again, we'll keep an eye on for further hints when we get to training camp.
Houston Texans, Jared, if we're talking about them, we're almost always talking about Joe Mixon. And in his 12 games last year, his 12 full games when he was healthy, ranked 4th among running backs in expected PPR points per game, 6th in actual PPR points per game. And yet people still don't want to draft him.
Yeah, current ADP on Underdog, running back 16. I don't think we need to say anything else.
Yep. Check the Best Ball Values video and article. You'll find Joe Mixon there as well. I'm sure we'll talk about him plenty more times throughout the summer. Indianapolis Colts, like I mentioned, you can find their team overview article on draftsharks.com right now. Jared, what happened here that we thought was interesting?
This was a completely different offense last year in Anthony Richardson games versus Joe Flacco games. So in Richardson's games, 58 plays per game, a super low number. In Flacco games, that jumped to 65.6 plays per game. And then you look at the pass rate, 47.1% pass with Richardson, 59.0% pass with Joe Flacco. And as you'd expect, that had a huge impact on the wide receivers. Josh Downs was 46th among receivers in PPR points per game with Richardson, 17th in the Flacco games. Michael Pittman, 63rd with Anthony Richardson, 27th with Joe Flacco. So big question in Indianapolis this season is who's going to be under center. I think if you're drafting these wide receivers, you want it to be Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I agree. And I think at their relative draft prices, it makes more sense to stash Daniel Jones as a third quarterback, especially even if Anthony Richardson opens the season as a starter. We already know the Colts will be willing to pull him if it doesn't get better, and there's some injury risk to his style of play. So Daniel Jones, some upside for like super flex. And for Josh Downs' sake in particular, I hope that it's Daniel Jones for at least a good chunk of this season.
Yep.
Jacksonville Jaguars, not a lot of mystery to this guy, but it's worth focusing on just how good Brian Thomas Jr. was last year, averaged 2.45 yards per route. All other Jaguars wide receivers combined for 1.06. What do we take away from that, Jared?
Yeah, again, Brian Thomas is very good. Go back to Travis Hunter. Like, there's just a lot of reasons to be wary of him, because even if he is going to be a full-time player on offense, which I have my doubts about, he's competing with this guy who looks like the next superstar wide receiver. Even if Travis Hunter is very good, it's going to be tough for him to overtake Brian Thomas this year.
Yeah, we've seen Thomas's ADP come down a little bit since the Travis Hunter pick. I think if anything, Thomas is a negative for Hunter as opposed to Hunter being a negative for Thomas. And there's room for Hunter to do something because as those numbers we just talked about show, there wasn't a whole lot good besides Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville last year. Kansas City Chiefs, Jared, what you got on the old guy?
Yeah, Travis Kelce really underachieved in the touchdown department last year. And if you owned him in a season-long league or played him in DFS, you probably know that he had just 3 touchdowns all season. That was tied for 18 among tight ends, but it was not for lack of opportunity. Kelce actually led all tight ends last year with 8.7 expected receiving touchdowns, again, based on his targets and where they're coming on the field. He ranked 2nd among tight ends with 33 targets inside the red zone. So I just think it was a case of mostly just poor touchdown luck. We know touchdowns vary from season to season. They're very volatile. I think Kelce's a good bet to score more this year, even if you think he's on the decline and his overall production is going to dip. I do think we'll get more than 3 touchdowns in 2025.
Yeah, it turns 36 on October 5th, so we probably can't expect above expectation performance, but I think it's fair to expect him to get a lot closer to expectation. We'll be watching early in the season to see if the playing time changes at all. Like if they shift any more of his playing time to Noah Gray, that will be a concern. But at draft time, I think he's, if anything, a value. Las Vegas Raiders, another tight end, Brock Bowers, scored the 2nd most PPR points per game by a rookie tight end in NFL history, trailing only Mike Ditka, but beating Sam Laporta. So, I mean, what do we do with that? He's tight end 1 now.
Yep, he's very good. He's very expensive in drafts. You're going to have to take him, late round 1, early round 2, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around if that's a good pick. I know our numbers right now, if you go to the draft forum, they don't have him valued anywhere that highly. But a fact like this is a reminder that this guy is very good, and he's definitely capable of, returning at least, early round 2 type of value.
Yeah, I think he's a good player to fade overall. Make sure you get a few shares of just in case there's something even better ahead. Now that he's got a better quarterback than he had last year, by the way. Los Angeles Chargers, who are we looking at?
Ladd McConkey, another guy coming off an incredible rookie season. He was up over 2.3 yards per route run like Brian Thomas was last year. And those two were two of the 6 rookie wide receivers to top 2.3 yards per route over the last 5 seasons. The other 4, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Chris Olave. So pretty nice company for Ladd McConkey and Brian Thomas Jr. And the other note I had on these guys, all 4 of those previous wide receivers, Nacua, Jefferson, Chase, and Olave, averaged more PPR points per game in their second seasons than they did as rookies.
Unfortunately, I think the market's expecting that for Ladd McConkey. I was wrong on McConkey last year. I missed out on his awesome rookie season. If he does even better this season, I'm going to miss out on it again because my concern is that he costs a lot. Wide receiver 11 on Underdog at the moment, mid round 2. He's wide receiver 14 in our best ball rankings. So that's not a big difference, but it's a big enough difference that he's not likely to get recommended for you. I'm fading Ladd McConkey overall. We'll talk more about the Chargers offense as we go through the summer. And that's actually going to be the first team that I put out there in the team overview series on draftsharks.com. So lots to dig into on that Chargers offense. Across Los Angeles to the Rams, we've got Puka Nacua, who was pretty good still when he got on the field last year.
His, overall season long numbers are depressed because he missed time with injury. He left at least one game early. He got thrown out of that Seahawks game. So there were 9 full games from Puka Nacua last year. In those 9 games, 10.9 targets per game on a 35.6% target share. Just huge numbers there. 8.2 catches per game, 105 receiving yards per game, 0.33 touchdowns per game. Nacua was wide receiver 3 in both expected and actual PPR points per game in those 9 full games last year.
It seemed shortly after the Devontae Adams signing that Puka might slide down ADP a little bit. He's wide receiver 4 in best ball ADP, looking at Underdog, wide receiver 6 on Drafters, which is full PPR. So not a big slide, but he could be a player that slides in individual drafts in round 1. And I think anytime he gets past the middle of the round, go ahead and grab some Puka Nacua. I don't mind taking him in the first half either.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are worried about Devontae Adams, but we've seen Puka and Cooper Kupp both produce elite numbers. I think those guys, Adams and Nacua, are capable of doing it in 2025.
The Miami Dolphins did not have Tua Tagovailoa throw the ball as deep last year as he did the previous 2, right?
That's right. Just 6.0% of Tua's passes last year went 20 plus yards downfield. That was the lowest mark in the entire league. And it was down from the previous 2 seasons, 13.8 and 11.2% the previous 2 seasons. So basically cut in half from the amount of downfield passing we saw from Tua the previous 2 seasons versus last year. That to me was almost entirely a result of a bad Dolphins offensive line. And that to me is a big reason why Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane had big seasons and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle disappointed, because so much of the Dolphins passing game was those super short passes to Jonnu and Devon Achane. So that's a big question heading into 2025 is, can the offensive line improve and hold up enough for those, intermediate and deep passes to kind of come back to the Dolphins passing game?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of places I would be more concerned than I am with Miami, but I think the players that we're talking about here are good, especially those top 2 receivers. And Mike McDaniel, I trust at least as much, if not more, than just about any coach in the league to really assess what was wrong and fix it, at least at the level of planning and implementation. And then, we'll see how things work once we get into the season. I think there's some nice upside, not, screaming values, but I think there's nice upside in the current market costs for Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Tua, and even Devon Achane, actually.
And even Jonnu Smith, the more I've thought about the offseason, I don't think Miami's improved the offensive line enough that I just think by necessity, Jonnu Smith's going to be a big part of the passing. I know it's scary because, he broke out in his, 6th season or whatever and had this huge season, but I don't think a ton's going to change with his usage this year.
Yeah, from tight end 6, though, I'm going to be a pass on that one.
Yeah, he's no bargain, but I think he's fine there.
Minnesota Vikings, they have finished top 6 in passing yards and passing touchdowns in all 3 of their seasons under head coach Kevin O'Connell, and they did that with Sam Darnold in the lineup last year. So, Jared, are we wary of the team regressing from that this season, or is that a reason to like JJ McCarthy?
To me, it's a reason to like JJ McCarthy more than anything else. Now, I do think we could see the Vikings shift a little bit more toward the run with this essentially rookie quarterback under center. They add Jordan Mason, give him that, upgrade as a big bodied early down back. So maybe a bit more running from Minnesota this year, but I still think the passing game is going to be super efficient. I think JJ McCarthy is good enough. He was an efficient passer at Michigan. And you have O'Connell and you have Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson. It's going to be tough for McCarthy to not be an efficient passer. So I'm definitely in on him at his quarterback 20 ADP.
Yeah, I think that ADP is important. He's going late enough for it to be okay. Justin Jefferson's just too good to worry about. Jordan Addison, I can kind of go either way on him. I don't want to be out completely on him at ADP. I'm also not excited. So it's a fairly shallow offense. So there aren't that many guys that you really have to make a decision on, or guys that I think are worth considering as, late upside candidates. So at least a fairly easy offense to figure out. New England Patriots, a little bit less easy to figure out with Drake May heading into his second season, plenty of changes at wide receiver and a new old OC in place. But one thing we know is that Drake May can run, right?
Yeah, for sure. 10 full games from Drake May last year. He averaged 36.3 rushing yards. That was the fourth most among quarterbacks. And May, across those 10 weeks, he led all quarterbacks with 349 yards on scrambles. Almost all his rushing production came on scrambles. And Gerard Mayo actually said late last season, or he didn't come out and say it, but he basically alluded to the fact that they weren't calling designed runs for Drake May because their season wasn't going anywhere. Right. They weren't going to risk their rookie quarterback on all these design runs in a season that wasn't going anywhere. So I think you're going to see at least a bit more design stuff for Drake May this year on top of the scrambling ability. So really his rushing upside for fantasy is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think that we often talk or think too much about how much designed rushing a quarterback gets, because most of the quarterback rushing comes off of these scrambles. And really the guys that we like are the ones that can escape and create yards like that. So Drake May going in value range. I'm happy that he hasn't gotten the second year bump along with some of his classmates. Probably didn't score enough fantasy points overall to get much higher. New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara, I mean, almost the only guy worth talking about, but at least the guy we'll talk about the most. Led all running backs in target share 3 of the past 4 years. He ranked 3rd at the position the other year. That's why it's easier to not worry about his age and just say, yeah, I'll go ahead and take him in RB2 range.
Yeah, I mean, new head coach for the Saints this year, new quarterback, but really, I mean, you can't not expect Kamara to play a big role in the passing game when you look at what he's done throughout his entire career. And you look at the Saints pass catching core. I mean, I like Chris Olave, I like Rashid Shaheed, but there is nothing beyond those guys. I think Kamara is a good bet to be at least the 3rd target in this passing game.
We also can't not expect big things from Malik Neighbors after what he did as a rookie for the New York Giants.
Just a massive 32.2% target share for Malik Neighbors last year. That led all wide receivers as a rookie. He also led all wide receivers in first read target share at 42.8%, which basically tells us that the Giants were scheming up plays to get the ball in his hands. Smart move considering the rest of the pass catching core. They didn't do anything to the pass catching core this offseason. They're bringing back the same group. So Malik Neighbors, his target projection is as strong as any wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, they did do something. They paid up to keep Darius Slayton around. So that says they were like, oh, we like what we had last year. We're going to keep things going as they did. Russell Wilson, Jackson Dart, and Jameis Winston probably all would have been upgrades over last year's quarterback situation. So no matter how the quarterbacks play out this year, it shouldn't be a negative for Malik Neighbors. I'm very comfy with him anywhere in the middle of round 1. I think he has upside all the way to the top of the position.
Agreed.
New York Jets, speaking of guys with upside who haven't quite shown it as much yet, Garrett Wilson, 22.8% target share in 11 games with Davante Adams last year. Fared better when Davante Adams was not on his team though, right?
Yeah, 28.5% target share in 23 games without Adams over the last 2 seasons. So, the beginning of last year and all of the previous season. So 28.5%, that is an elite number. Obviously Davante Adams no longer with the Jets. They haven't really added much to the position this offseason. So Garrett Wilson's a guy who, could flirt with a 30% target share this season, which even with Justin Fields under center, that would make Wilson a pretty good bet for at least, like top 15 fantasy production.
Yeah, I have no idea what Garrett Wilson's actual stat ceiling is because he hasn't played with a good quarterback yet. I mean, you can count Aaron Rodgers, but obviously it's a very late career version of Aaron Rodgers plus Davante Adams for a lot of that time. And you could say he still doesn't have a good quarterback in Justin Fields, but 2023 Bears, DJ Moore with Justin Fields finished 6th among wide receivers in total PPR points, 9th at the position in PPR points per game. Different team, different player, obviously, but we at least know that it's possible for Fields to support a wide receiver 1 Philadelphia Eagles, Jared. We know that Jalen Hurts won't have to give up the tush push, the brotherly shove this season. What else should we know about Jalen Hurts, though?
It's interesting. There were only 4 games last year that you had Jalen Hurts with his top 3 receivers all healthy for the entire game. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. And surprisingly, Hurts was much better in those 4 games with his top 3 guys than without. His yards per attempt, 9.0 with a healthy receiving core, 7.7 in the 10 games without at least one of those guys. Touchdown rate also climbed from 4.8% to 5.6% in those 4 games with a full receiver core. So I think, with better health this year, we should expect better passing efficiency from Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, and all those guys missed multiple games. I think especially when you lose A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith for multiple games, you have to factor that in the following year. I think that's not being factored into Jalen Hurts' expectations heading into this year. We talked about him before as a value as well. You can check that best ball values video. Pittsburgh Steelers, interesting backfield for 2025. Jaylen Warren wasn't great last year, but he was especially rough early in the season. 3.1 yards per carry over the first 4 games of the year, 4.5 yards per carry over the final 11 games. What do you think here?
I think the poor efficiency early was injury related. He had hamstring and knee injuries early in the season. He had been an efficient runner prior to the start of last year. And then again, like you said, Matt, was an efficient runner again over the final 11 last year. So I still like Jaylen Warren. I'm still in at him at his, kind of reduced cost now, even after adding Caleb Johnson. I think Warren's going to remain involved in the running game enough, and I think he's going to continue to dominate the pass catching work.
Yeah, had already overtaken Najee Harris as the lead receiver out of the backfield. So that's especially important because Caleb Johnson, the biggest question with him, the receiving coming into the league. So we'll see how the work splits, but Jaylen Warren certainly upside from his draft position. San Francisco 49ers, Brock Purdy, 8.9 yards per attempt over the past 3 seasons. That leads all 44 quarterbacks with 500 plus attempts over that span. Jared, what do we do with this?
Second on that list is Tua Tagovailoa at 8.1 yards per attempt. So, 0.8 yards behind Brock Purdy. So just a reminder of how, this is a Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan note, just how efficient that passing game is. They did lose Deebo Samuel this offseason. They do have Brandon Ayuk coming off a serious knee injury, but I still think there's enough weapons there where, Brock Purdy is going to continue to be one of, if not the most efficient passers, at least from a yards per attempt perspective in the NFL.
It's good to be a Kyle Shanahan quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard all had more than 8 yards per pass attempt under Shanahan. Seattle Seahawks, I like Kenneth Walker. Should I keep liking Kenneth Walker?
You should, yeah. Career best PFF rushing grade for Walker last year at 91.2. That was 3rd among 47 qualifying running backs. And even over the course of the past 2 seasons, Walker is one of only 3 running backs to top an 85 PFF rushing grade in both 2023 and 2024. The other 2 are Derrick Henry and James Conner. So more James Conner love, but those have been at least from PFF standards, the 3 best runners over the last 2 seasons.
And Walker's strong value at RB19 and underdog ADP, RB18 on drafters. So I like it. I'm curious to see where this season takes him. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we alluded to Baker Mayfield up in the bit about Joe Burrow, 7.2% touchdown rate last year. That was the 7th highest among 228 quarterback seasons of 400 plus pass attempts over the last 10 seasons. Now, you don't have to follow all those numbers. The baseline here, that was very high, and a very high touchdown rate is almost certain to come down. He finished QB3 in most formats last year, going QB7. So drafters are building in a little bit of regression. I don't think they're building in enough regression, though. It's one of the easiest fades at the position for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I looked into, I was kind of trying to project how much regression we should expect from Baker coming off that 7.2% touchdown rate. Over the last 10 seasons, there were 11 other quarterback seasons of a 7+% touchdown rate. Only one of those 11 guys reached 7% the following year. 7 of the 11 dipped below 5.5 the following season, and 4 of the 11 didn't even get to 4.5 the following season. So he's going to dip, and the dip could be pretty significant.
Yeah, I would say 5.5 is a fair expectation. Was the one who didn't Aaron Rodgers?
I believe so.
That's the kind of guy like Joe Burrow, where if a guy proves over and over again that he gets that high touchdown rate, then you can believe in it. But Baker Mayfield's not that guy. Tennessee Titans, we've talked about Calvin Ridley previously. Jared, what should we talk about with Calvin Ridley here?
Significant splits for Ridley last year in 6 games with DeAndre Hopkins versus the 11 games without Hopkins. So with Hopkins, those 6 games, Ridley averaged just 6 targets per game, and he was wide receiver 60 in expected PPR points. In 11 games without Hopkins, 7.6 targets per game, wide receiver 26 in expected PPR points. Hopkins is gone. They added, Van Jefferson and Tyler Lockett and a couple of 4th-round rookies. Like there's guys there, but Ridley should be the pretty clear, target hog in Tennessee this year with what should be upgraded quarterback play. So Ridley, going in the wide receiver 30s, mid 30s in ADP, I think he's a pretty nice value at this point.
And really, it might be his first time as a target hog outside of that partial season before he went out with the personal issues. So we don't even really know exactly what his upside is here. I'm not excited about him, but we did talk about him on the 7 post-draft winner show, upside beyond where he is, and the kind of player, unlike most receivers, that you might like better in non-best ball rosters than for best ball. So check out more about Calvin Ridley in that video. We'll wrap it up here with the Washington Commanders. Jared, Terry McLaurin, the guy who confounded our projections all last season. What are we looking at with him?
Yeah, McLaurin just couldn't stop scoring touchdowns last year. He was second among all wide receivers with 13 touchdowns. But you kind of look at his usage and expected touchdowns, just 7.7 expected touchdowns. That was 13th among wide receivers. And that 5.3 touchdown difference between his expected touchdowns and actual touchdowns was the biggest among all wide receivers. So, we like Washington's offense. Could be even better this year, but you also add in the fact that, Deebo Samuel arrived this offseason. McLaurin's a guy I have not been taking too much of at ADP right now.
Yeah, wide receiver 16 on Underdog, wide receiver 17 on Drafters. I have drafted him one time in my 93 Drafters drafts so far this offseason. And I think it's worth noting, too, that he's player 29 in the overall ADP on Drafters. Jaden Daniels, player 42. That actually lines them up where I think most teams not most, but at least a large percentage of Terry McLaurin teams are probably stacking him with Jaden Daniels. So even if you make that move, you're probably not gaining an advantage on others in the field. So all together, that just makes Terry McLaurin not a very attractive player for me at cost.
Yeah, I think Deebo Samuel and even Zach Ertz, which is disgusting to say, might be better values among the Commanders pass catchers.
And Jaden Daniels is one of the quarterbacks that you can most easily take without worrying about the stacking. You can just take him. If stacks happen, great. If it doesn't work out, you're still fine because he's going to score plenty of points with his feet and probably spread the ball around a bit more than he did last year. Check out the Colts preview article on Draft Sharks right now. You can find the Texans preview article there as well. That just means there are 30 more to follow. So be sure to check back to find out what all the teams have to look forward to or not look forward to in 2025. You will also find our in-depth player profiles on every fantasy relevant player on the Draft Sharks player pages in early June. And of course, you can find the rankings even without those player profiles right now for absolutely any format that you're looking to draft, because draftsharks.com is your unfair advantage.